Hi everybody, welcome to your week 3 lesson for Psychology 1105 Community Psychology. Your Professor Lindsay Rivard here. So what I'm going to do right now is go over some of the introductory concepts for this week. And we'll just jump right into our material. So this week is the last bit of new content for the first unit in our class. So after you are completed this material, you can do your first test for our class. Now, of course, we talk about the test a little bit more in your week 3 overview. In addition to that, there will be a separate video tutorial just running through how to go about doing the test, some of the important things that you'll need to keep in mind while you're writing the test, etc. But this week marks the end of your first unit. So you, my friends, are 1/3 of the way done your class for us. So congratulations, you're doing great, and hang in there. You're doing really good work. So this week you are looking at chapters 5 and 6 of your textbook. So we are getting into a little bit more of a in detail topic about how we understand people, individuals themselves, and how those individuals experience the communities that they participate in. So let's start things off with chapter 5. So chapter 5 is specifically looking at how people experience the environments in which they live. So this is all about, this is what chapter 5 is all about. So in community psychology, of course, we're very interested in understanding how people's lives are impacted by the specific environments in which they live. So just for a moment, if you want to take a second and think about how somebody's life might be affected, either positively or negatively, by the interactions that they would have with all of these different types of environments or communities that they would engage in on a day-to-day basis. So how might some person's life be affected by family, by their friendships, by the neighborhood that they live in, or the town or city, by the place they go to work every day, and by the country that they live in, right? So we know that, and this isn't even the end, of the different types of communities that we all belong to. So we know that every single person in our world, right, we belong to a different set of these environments or community types. And based on that, that's going to basically inform our day-to-day experience, right? So in community psychology, we use a few different models. So we're using that term model as kind of like an approach or a theory to think about how different environments impact or affect the people who live and work in them. Now, your textbook discusses 6 of these models. We are going to focus on 3 of them in this class, or in this lesson rather. So this lesson is going to look at the social climate model, behavior settings model, which is a part of ecological psychology, and environmental psychology. So you are responsible for looking at the other 3 in your textbook. So the other 3 are about the 4 ecological principles, social regularities, and activity settings. So I'm going to leave it up to you to look at those other 3. We are going to focus on these 3. All right. Now, a quick note about these different models or theories before we jump into discussing them. So these are essentially just conceptual tools or frameworks for us to think about how community contexts affect the people who live in them, how they affect our functioning as people. These theories do not compete with one another, okay? So that's important. One is not better than the other. They're just different ways for us to think about how individual people are affected by the communities in which they live or participate on a day-to-day basis. So again, we're using that term community or environment in kind of a loose way, right? We're using it in a bit of a vague way on purpose to make sure that it captures things like microsystems, localities, organizations, etc., right? That it's really capturing all the ecological levels of analysis. So let's start things off with the social climate model. Really interesting theory for how we understand how individuals experience the communities that they participate in. So this model is all about how people's shared perceptions of a setting affect their experience of that particular setting. So if a group of people have a shared perception of, say, for example, their family, right? How is that going to impact their experience of the family? Say, for example, a group of coworkers all have a shared perception of their place of employment. We know that's going to impact their well-being at that particular organization. So this is all about how we interpret the community settings that we belong to and participate in, and how well we feel that those settings promote our well-being. And of course, if we feel that this is a setting that contributes to our well-being, then obviously that's going to be a much more positive experience for us to participate in that setting. So the social climate model gauges these things based on 3 dimensions. So it's concerned with 3 dimensions of the community setting that we participate in. And these 3 dimensions are the relationships that we have within that setting or climate, the personal development that is encouraged in that particular setting, and then how the system itself, how the climate itself either maintains itself or changes, how structured it is. So I'm going to go into each of these 3 dimensions in a bit more detail. So again, number 1, first dimension is relationships. I think we can all probably agree that the social climates that we participate in, like a family or a workplace, that they are majorly impacted by the kinds of relationships that we have with other people in those climates. That probably makes sense to everybody. You know, one of the things that people will often say about their work is, you know, they might say, oh, well, you know, I don't really like the work, but, you know, the people really make it. I love the people I work with. This is the big one, right? So it examines how relationships that a person has within a setting affect the quality of their experience there, and it examines the quality of those relationships. 2 ways that we measure the quality of relationships are through these 2 scales. So these 2 scales are questionnaires, essentially, that we can give to people to help measure the quality of the relationships that they have with other people in the settings that they participate in. So these are just 2 examples. There are other types of questionnaires or scales that we can give people to help them essentially gauge the quality of the relationships that they have with people in these kinds of settings. First one you're seeing, classroom environment scale. This is a questionnaire that we would give to people who are in a classroom setting, most often students in an elementary or high school. And what it allows us to do is to identify any issues that exist within that classroom environment based on the relationships that kids have with one another or students have with one another. You know, and so we'll use that kind of classroom environment scale to, investigate, okay, is this a classroom with positive dynamics? Do people feel that they can trust one another? Do people feel encouraged and supported by their classmates? Perhaps are the relationships in this environment a bit more toxic, associated with bullying kinds of behaviors, things like that? The second one, the family environment scale, we would use it for the exact same purposes, but just within a family setting. So the questions are a little bit different and would be tailored a little bit more to a family. And again, what this allows us to do is determine the quality of the relationships. Again, are these relationships characterized by trust and warmth? Are they characterized by healthy boundaries, unhealthy boundaries? And it really helps us to zero in on specific aspects of the relationships between people that might be problematic. So the second dimension is personal development. We all want to be in a social climate that encourages or fosters our own individual growth. So again, we know that a workplace, for example, where employees do not feel that they can grow to reach their full potential as a professional, that's a really difficult scenario for a lot of people to be a part of. So that's one that we're very concerned with. And then the third dimension that the social climate model is concerned with is system maintenance and change. So this is basically looking at how predictable is this environment? How structured is it? How clear is it? When you enter into your family environment or your workplace, is, do you feel that you have a sense of control over your day, over your immediate environment? Are the rules of sort of interaction and behavior very clear? Are they not? Do the rules change on a day-to-day basis? We know that can be very stressful for people. So again, major factors for us to consider when we are trying to understand a social climate and how an individual person will experience that particular social climate. So again, our experiences or perceptions of a setting will vary dramatically based on these three dimensions and how well a specific community or environment fosters or promotes each of these three dimensions. All right, very interesting model for us to understand how people experience the environments in which they live. So of course, what the social climate model allows us to do is evaluate and measure the quality of a lot of different microsystems and especially organizational settings. This is where this model is particularly applicable and helpful. So again, we might evaluate schools or workplaces, families. We can go into a psychiatric hospital, a group home. This has been used in prisons, for example. And we do this research that produces a report or a profile of this specific setting and across the three dimensions, right? And then that allows us to determine, okay, what's functioning well, what's not functioning well, what can we do a little bit differently to help people who are participating in these settings have a better experience. So basically what we then do is make comparisons of the different perceptions that people have within these groups. This leads to very great conversation amongst people who live and participate in these groups and interventions for how we can change a group. It also allows us to track changes over time, right? So what we could do is go into a setting, do the questionnaires, right? Do the research, come back maybe a couple years later, do it again, and we can say, oh man, you guys are doing way better now than you were doing a few years ago. XYZ factors have improved, things like satisfaction and performance. People are saying that they're functioning more cohesively and that they feel a better sense of well-being, etc. So the social climate model is really interesting. What we're going to talk about next is the behavior settings model. So I'm going to pause things here and we will pick back up in part 2 of your week 3 lesson. Okay, cheers.